Hello, thank you for being here, and welcome to the Carpenter Center. For how many of you is this your first time at the Carpenter Center? Wonderful. I hope you come back often. We are so thrilled that you are here as part of the B-Word project. I hope you've noticed all those big banners on campus that are hopefully kind of provocative. They are encouraging you, students and community members, to go to our website, bwordproject.org, and look at all the activities that are happening. The next speaker is going to tell you a little bit more about the B-Word Project, but I wanted to add my voice of encouragement that you come and join us for other B-Word Project events. I'm also going to be shameless and tell you about a wonderful dance production that we have coming up here a week from Saturday on October 15th. I'm going to tell you, students, because I think this is a show you will like. It's a ballet called Ballet Maribor. It's a version of Romeo and Juliet that imagines what would have happened if Juliet hadn't died, and it's set to Radiohead music. Oh yeah, cool, huh? And even more cool, CSULB students are eligible to take advantage of a Hot Ticks program that we have running, and that will get you a ticket for $20, which is an amazing price for this really amazing dance company. Go to the Carpenter Center website and check out their video, and then come back and see Ballet Maribor a week from Saturday night. So now, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Karen Kleinfelder of the art department and one of our co-conspirators here in the B-Word Project, who will introduce a really amazing woman that we are all thrilled and privileged to have here on our stage. Ladies and gentlemen, Karen Kleinfelder.
Well, welcome, and thank you for braving the rain to get here for this evening's event. Can we have the next slide? We call the event Judy Chicago Through and Beyond the Flower, and as you can see, I stole those titles from her two autobiographies. My life would never fill two autobiographies, which is just one of the many reasons I am in such awe of tonight's speaker. I teach art history here at CSULB, as a lot of you know, and this semester I'm co-teaching a seminar on censorship with Dr. Katha Paquette, who teaches Latin American art history. We were the ones who proposed bringing Judy Chicago to campus today to talk not only about her extraordinary life in art and her vast body of work, but to hear what she also has to say at this point in her career about censorship issues. A pioneering feminist artist, she taught the very first feminist art class at Cal State Fresno in 1970, and then continued teaching feminist art courses at Cal Arts with Miriam Shapiro, which led to the collaborative performative space, Woman House, and of course, the monumental multimedia installation known as the Dinner Party. Now, many other notable projects would follow after that, but she describes the process of breaking through the boys' club as a struggle. And she certainly experienced more than her full share of being censored along the way from both inside and outside the art world. Now, tonight's event would not be possible without the joint support of the Art Department Visiting Artists Lecture Series and the B-Word Project, banned, blacklisted, boycotted, censorship, and the response to it. Now, this campus-wide initiative is offering courses across the curriculum and many different kinds of special events, as Michelle said. We launched the project this semester, but it goes on next semester, and it culminates in the fall of 2012 when the NEA4, artists who had their grants revoked during the culture wars, will reunite on this campus. I urge you all to check out the wonderful website at bword.org, bwordproject.org, and especially to check out the courses that are being given associated with the B-Word Project. So when you're looking for courses for next semester and the semester after that, go to the bwordproject.org website. A special thanks goes to Michelle Roberge, who introduced me. director of this lovely Carpenter Performing Arts Center. She initiated that B-Word project, and she also steered it through a very highly competitive, prestigious, competitive grant process, and she won, which is why we're here tonight. It is funded by the Association of Performing Arts Presenters, along with the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation. So thank you, Michelle, for sharing your theater with us. Thank you to her staff, especially Beto Gonzalez, who is the special coordinator for this project, and he truly is special. Now, next slide. In 1962, Jansen published a textbook on the history of art, which for many years would be the standard text by which we all learned art history. I was bottle-fed on Jansen. The original text included 3,000 reproductions of works of art, none of which were by a woman, not one. The textbook went through revisions, new editions, but Jansen continued to refuse to include any woman artist, declaring, quote, "I have not been able to find a woman artist who clearly belongs in a one-volume history of art." Well, Jansen, I found one. And she found many others from throughout history. When Judy Chicago got the enlightened idea of throwing a dinner party for the forgotten women of art history, she ended up setting the table for 39 women, some mythological, others historical, and on the heritage floor, 999 other names are enshrined on those porcelain tiles. And art history has never been the same. This multimedia installation work was groundbreaking on many levels. While minimalist sculpture had followed formalist aesthetics by shedding any extra pictorial baggage and reducing the structure down to its primary essential shapes, Judy Chicago found it essential to go in the exact opposite direction. By adding names and telling stories of the women the work referenced, by making research and a revisionist art history an integral part of the work. Her imagery was not reductive to shape and form alone. On the contrary, it was symbolic, iconographical. Instead of following formalist critic Clement Greenberg's dictates to be true to the medium, making the work define the medium, she shattered that idea of purity of medium by going multimedia, and in a way that would make Greenberg cringe because she drew on the lowly crafts, ceramics, needlework, embroidery, decorative plate painting, women's work. On the issue of labor and production, however, the work was particularly cutting edge because she offered an alternative to the idea that an artwork is the solitary vision of an artist's genius working alone in his studio. Judy Chicago made the dinner party a collaboration, worked out relationally with others, men and women, over 400 to be exact. You would think a major artwork that upset the codes and norms so radically as this one, a work that had become an icon, a controversial icon at that, you would think that it would be in today's art history textbooks. But Jonathan Feinberg's Art Since 1940, the standard text used today, leaves it out. Ironically, this work about the missing women of art history became itself missing in action, but never forgotten. It was censored in Congress, which in part led to its going homeless for many years, tucked away in storage. The dinner party lived on in book form. Finally, in 2007, the dinner party was given a permanent home at the Elizabeth A. Sackler Center of the Brooklyn Museum. It had only taken about 30 years. Clearly, the struggle is not over, even in our postmodern, post-colonial world. Those in the margins continue to fight for a voice because power structures still operate by inclusions and exclusions, and that's true of the art world. For me, Judy Chicago's writing of her story, can we have the next slide? Thank you. Is not a sideline activity of her studio work. I see her books, her writing, as part of her art practice. Her personal story was inspirational to a generation of women emerging in the 1970s during the women's movement, when the struggle to free yourself from that boys' club to create an art of your own on a woman's terms, whatever those terms would be, when that struggle was really raging. It is perhaps, though, even more important for a much younger generation of women and men today to read her story. Because this early history that your mothers, your grandmothers lived through is in danger of becoming erased and forgotten, like those missing women, once again. I urge you not to let that happen. Reading Judy Chicago is a good way to regain that historical perspective from a particular woman's story. By the way, Judy Chicago's dinner party was finally reproduced in Jansen. It just took till the 7th edition, 34 years after he had died. All right, let's not wait any longer. Judy Chicago is here.
Well, Karen solved a problem for me. I was asked in an interview yesterday, what was so controversial about the dinner party? I think I'll just refer them to Karen, because she did a really good job explaining it. How are you? Is there anybody here who doesn't know a thing about me? Okay, good. Be honest. And you came to the lecture anyway? Is that because you were assigned to do it? I have been making art since I was 5 years old. So I started drawing when I was 3. And I started going to art school when I was 5. And I always wanted to be an artist. And I wanted to make a contribution to art history. I was raised in a family that believed in equal rights for women. That's the good news. The bad news is they didn't tell me the rest of the world did not agree. So when I went to college at UCLA for my bachelor's and my master's, I discovered with a start that there were going to be some obstacles to my ambitions that I had not anticipated. I thought I'd do a brief overview of my work and discuss different aspects of censorship as I've experienced it. As you can see from these title images, my middle name could be said to be work, which has defined my life. Could I have the next one? By the way, these wonderful assemblages of images have been put together by my husband, photographer Donald Woodman. I'm the luckiest girl in the world because every artist should be married to a photographer. We've assembled a series of images that kind of will briefly tell you about the different decades of my career, with an eye to discussing, as I said, the different forms of censorship I experienced. During the first decade of my career, I experienced 2 forms of censorship. The first was self-censorship, which began when I was in graduate school, where my male professors expressed great disdain and disgust about my images, which were full of openly female forms, which you do not see here. Yuck! I'm really, really sorry to ask you, maybe people could take turns with the babies. It's really hard for me to concentrate. I don't mean to be the slightest bit rude. I know it's a conflict for you. Anyway, my early work was full of openly female forms. Yuck, they said, wombs and breasts. In response, I excised my work of any hint of gender, or at least I tried to, but it kept slipping in. For example, in this car hood on the top left, which is presently at the Getty Museum as part of the Pacific Standard Time, I had gone to auto body school when I got out of graduate school to learn to spray paint. Speaking of censorship, there was me and 250 guys, and they made me wear this white, long Mother Hubbard covering. I didn't exactly understand why. It was like maybe if I bent over while I was spraying, a glimpse of breast would be seen, as if these guys had never seen one. At any rate, so they I was in a way censored in terms of apparel. But the more important censorship was that resulted from my professor's negative response to my work. As I said, I excised or tried to any hint of gender from my work, but it kept slipping in, as for example in this car hood, which could be read as female forms impaled on a phallic structure, because what is more phallic than a car hood? Also, in the image on the bottom left from a series called Pasadena Lifesavers, by this time I had done a lot of monumental sculpture, like Rainbow Picket, the sculpture in the center. And I went back to painting at the end of the 1960s. You can see how minimal Rainbow Picket is. You couldn't really tell, I think, except in retrospect, whether it was made by a male or a female artist. Although Peter Plagens, when writing about it in Art Forum, said it didn't have the guns, which tells you something about the state of art criticism in the 1960s. And another story in relationship to censorship had to do with what happened when I was finished with Rainbow Picket. I was working in Pasadena in a large studio. In Pasadena at that time, there were a lot of artists living. It was before Pasadena was gentrified. Three of us had a 5,000 square foot space that we rented for $75 a month. Artists always go where there's cheap, plentiful space. Anyway, at that time, there was an exceedingly powerful curator named Walter Hopps who worked at the Pasadena Museum of Art. And Walter used to visit the artist studios in Pasadena on a regular basis every month. I was the only woman artist who was working at that time, visibly. And when I finished Rainbow Picket, I showed it to Walter on his next visit, and he refused to look at it. Absolutely refused to look at it. Many years later, I had breakfast with him. I had by then published Through the Flower, my first autobiography, where I talked about this experience, although I didn't mention Walter by name. And Walter said to me, "I know you hated me, Judy." Actually, he broke my heart when he wouldn't look at the work. And he said, "You have to understand what the 60s was like. Women were either groupies or artists' wives who were supposed to take care of the artists, the male artists. So what was I to do when I saw a woman making art stronger than many of the men? It was as if I saw a woman pull up her skirt, roll down her stockings, and expose her thighs. I had to avert my eyes." Now that is a form of covert censorship, refusing to look at a woman's work because it was made by a woman. Another story, I made a series of domes. The most important gallery in Los Angeles in the early 1960s, in the 1960s when I got out of graduate school, was Ferris. The director of Ferris was a man named Irving Blum, and I invited him to my studio in Pasadena. I was working on a series of blown domes. And when he walked in, this is what I mean about my gender kept creeping into my work even though I was trying to censor it. He looked at the domes and he said, "Ah, the Venus of Willendorf," and refused to show my work. When I did Pasadena Lifesavers, which I was about to talk about, by that time I had begun to look back in history to see if any women before me had experienced what I was experiencing. And I was starting to try and express some aspects of my own experiences as a woman. sexuality, sexual agency, sexual desire, but I was doing so in a very coded form because it was too dangerous to reveal the truth about myself as a woman artist. So I was still struggling with issues of self-censorship when the women's movement started at the end of the 1960s. And with it, women began to talk openly and honestly about their experiences, many of which paralleled my own in the LA art scene. And so I decided that I was going to stop trying to make art like a man. I was going to stop censoring myself, since I was still being censored by the art world in the sense that they wouldn't show my work, wouldn't support my work, and as a result, I had to put all of this work into storage if I didn't destroy it, like I destroyed Rainbow Picket and a lot of my large-scale sculpture because I didn't know what to do with it. I couldn't get the level of support the male artists were getting. And so I put some of the work in storage, and it wasn't until 2004 when LA MoCA did a minimal show called A Minimal Future, where they reconstructed Rainbow Picket. And they showed some of my early 60s work, that work began to be seen. Now, the good news is that since that time, my car hood was sold at auction to the Musée des Modernes in Stockholm and was borrowed back by the Getty for their show. Do you all know what Pacific Standard Time is? Yes, okay. Well, I'm very prominent in Pacific Standard Time, but one of the reasons that is because of the fact that consciousness has changed, and Pacific Standard Time has been put together by a group of young art historians and scholars for whom it would be unthinkable to have no women in the show. In addition to the car hood, they're also showing a painting from the series on the right, which is from a series called Flesh Gardens, 8 feet by 8 feet. This particular one is called Sky Flesh. The one in the Getty is called Big Blue Pink. And these were sprayed acrylic lacquer on acrylic sheet, 8 feet by 8 feet. They sat in storage for 30 years, and all I can say is I'm glad I lived long enough to see this work finally be recognized. Could I have the next? Oh, I forgot to tell you also that the other obstacle when I was young was being told all the time by the men in the art world that you couldn't be a woman and an artist too. What, are you applauding? Them or me, that I didn't listen? Oh, thank you, yes. What are you supposed to do, go saw yourself in half? Not. Okay. So, in the beginning, at the end of the 1960s, I was doing research before there were any women's studies courses, and at a point where there were stirrings around the country of disquiet women like me who wanted to be able to participate openly and fully in our chosen professions. I wanted to be able to be myself as a woman artist at a time when nobody even knew what that meant. In fact, it was the opposite. Women disguised, I was not the only woman to self-censor. There were women artists like Grace Hartigan who signed her paintings G. Hartigan so no one would know she was a woman. And overall, women made art, if they made art at all, with the hope of being accepted. They made art that looked like it was made by a man. That was the highest form of compliment. You make art that looks like men's. Now I think about it, I'm like, bleh. At any rate, by the end of the 60s, I was sick and tired of it. I didn't want to censor myself because if you censor yourself, you can't be yourself fully as an artist in your studio. You can't bring your whole self to bear on your work. Self-censorship is something I still see a lot of young people do, particularly young women. But I'll get back to that later. Okay, so at the end of the 60s and the beginning of the 70s, I decided I wanted to reconnect with the impulses that I had disconnected from when I was a young graduate student intent on being taken seriously in the LA art scene. But I really didn't know how to do it because by that time I had developed a visual language that was very distanced from my feelings. So I decided that maybe if I went back and retraced my steps by working with young female art students and helping them become professional artists without having to do what I had done, which was disconnect from my impulses as a woman, by helping them, maybe I could help myself too and find my way back to my authentic self. That was when I went to Fresno and started the first feminist art program. And it did, in fact, help me back to myself. Through those years, I began to start to try and figure out how to wed my real content, my real interests, with the visual language I had developed in the first decade of my career. And you can see the progress of that first in the left-hand image, Through the Flower, which is a 5-foot by 5-foot sprayed acrylic painting on canvas, which deals with moving through the petals of femininity to an open, larger space. And then in a series of drawings that are on display as part of Pacific Standard Time at LA MoCA in LA, a series called the Rejection Quintet, in which that combined drawing and writing, I chronicled why I was so afraid of revealing my true self. And I chronicled the level of rejection that I had experienced whenever I had tried to be myself as a woman in my work. Actually, it's very funny. A woman bought the Rejection Quintet out of its first show and attempted to gift it to the Chicago Art Institute, where I'd gone from the time I was 5 years old till I came to California. And the Chicago Art Institute rejected the Rejection Quintet. Perfect. It was after I peeled back that formal structure to reveal my real concerns as a woman, what it meant to be a woman historically, metaphysically, physically, sexually, that I began to look for another medium, one where I could use a paintbrush again, because I'd been using an airbrush, and I wanted more exact form than I could achieve with an airbrush. And quite by accident, I found China painting. I had never liked oil painting because I never liked applying paint to the top of a surface. I always liked to fuse color and surface, which one can do in porcelain painting because you actually fire the color onto the surface of the porcelain. So for 2 years, I apprenticed myself to the China painters. Meanwhile, I was continuing my research into women's history, and I had started a series of works called The Great Ladies, where I was making abstract images of the women I was finding who were inspiring me. And I decided I would do a series of 100 plates honoring women in history, and I would hang them on a wall, because that's where paintings belong. Except that it occurred to me that plates belong on a table, which was how the dinner party was born.